Ezekiel 33:3.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Bible Studies. Today we're going to be doing Exodus chapters 34 to 36. We'll start off with our quick review of Exodus and then our overview of Exodus chapters 34 to 36. If there's any questions, we'll take them at the end, and then we'll assign the reading for next week, or actually 2 weeks. So, overview of Exodus. Exodus 1:8-11. Then a new king who did not know Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to the people, the Israelites have become too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase even more. And if a war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians appointed taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. As a result, they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for the Pharaoh. We know there was a third city. The third city we can find inside of the Greek Septuagint. That city is called the city of On, also known as Heliopolis or Pillar City. The reason why this is important is because this is where we find those standing obelisks, and those obelisks show up in front of a lot of our government buildings today. We can see in the District of Columbia, the City of London, and Vatican City. And all three of those places are separate from the country that they reside in. They are city-states. Exodus 2:23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. This really focuses on the lineage of the Levites. So we've got Levi, one of the children of Jacob, who is Israel, and then we have Kohath. And then Amram and Jochebed are the parents of Moses. Jochebed is the mother. Amram is the father. And then we see Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. And again, it's interesting because, of course, Moses didn't actually receive the name of God until Exodus 3:14. Yet his mother has the name Yahweh, Jochebed. It's in her name. So when you look at it in Hebrew, you can see the Lord's name in there. It's interesting because when you go back to Genesis 4:26, you will not see it in the Masoretic text unless you're looking at the 1611 King James Version, the original. You'll find in the original 1611 King James Version, in the side notes, they translated the word shalal as to profane, not to proclaim. What the people were doing was they had idolized themselves. They had made themselves into idols using the name of the Lord. Moses was to be God to Pharaoh and Aaron his prophet. So Moses went before the Pharaoh after speaking to the Lord at the burning bush, and he started to tell the Pharaoh to let his people go and then perform these miracles. There was the first plague, blood in the river Nile. The second plague was an infestation of frogs. These two plagues the magicians of Egypt were able to replicate. The third plague, the swarm of gnats, or lice is the other word. The swarm of gnats or lice was a miracle that was not able to be replicated by the Egyptian magicians. At this point, they said, this is being done by the finger of God. Following this, we had the fourth plague, masses of flies. We don't actually know if they are flies. The translation was insects. The fifth plague was the death of all livestock. The sixth plague, disease or boils. And we did find that there was a Pharaoh and actually his entire family, his wife included, that had boils on her body. This was under Pharaoh Thutmose III. So it's quite likely that the Pharaoh of Exodus was Pharaoh Thutmose III, at least the one that got washed away. The seventh plague, storm and giant hail. The eighth plague, a plague of locusts. And the ninth plague, a plague of darkness that came across the land. It's interesting because after the darkness, we had the death of the firstborn. But just like the Bible, when we talk about the New Testament and the crucifixion of Christ, darkness fell across the land, and then Christ had died, and he was the firstborn. The 10th plague, death of the firstborn sons. At this point, we have the Israelites starting their exodus out of Egypt. We'll start now with Exodus chapters, and actually 34 to 36. Starting with Exodus chapter 34. Exodus 34 talks about the new stone tablets, and the Lord renews the covenant. Covenant, of course, means an agreement. So the new stone tablets, we're talking about the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets of stone. The original tablets of stone were smashed by Moses. Why were the tablets smashed by Moses? Because when Moses came down from the mountain the first time after 40 days and 40 nights, he saw them dancing and worshiping this idol, this golden calf. We found from our last study the golden calf, when we look in the New Testament, connect some scriptures together. This is actually Moloch. Exodus 32 and 19. As Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he burned with anger and threw the tablets out of his hands, shattering them at the base of the mountain. Now you can imagine the commandments were a big deal. To see them get smashed over this particular idol, remember this idol later in the future led to the sacrifice of the children. The Israelites were literally sacrificing their children to this idol in the future. Deuteronomy 10, 1-2. At that time, the Lord said to me, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the originals. It's really important that I point out that it's like the originals. I've heard some people argue that these were wood and then stone. No, both tablets were made out of stone in both situations. There wasn't one made of wood and another set that was made of stone. They were both made the same. So chisel out 2 tablets like the original. Come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. And this is where I think the confusion comes in. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. You are to place them in the ark. So you can see here that these 2 tablets of stone, after Moses had received them, he was to place them inside of the Ark of the Covenant. The tablets were to be placed in the Ark of the Covenant. So of course, the Ark of the Covenant, it was carried by the Levites with these poles. It was coated with gold. And then we had these 2 cherubim that curled and then faced inwards. And then above that was the mercy seat. The mercy seat is where the manifestation of God would appear to the people, or at least to the priests. Deuteronomy 10 and 5. And I went back down the mountain and placed the tablets in the ark I had made, as the Lord had commanded me, and there they have remained. So you'll see that the 2 tablets of stone stayed within the ark. Exodus 40 and 20. Moses took the testimony and placed it in the ark, attaching the poles to the ark, and he set the mercy seat atop the ark. The mercy seat is, of course, where the manifestation of God would appear. Hebrews 9 and 4. Containing the golden altar of incense and the gold, covered the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the ark were the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. So you can see there are a couple items that were inside the Ark of the Covenant. And this is in Hebrews, which is the New Testament. However, later in time, only the 2 tablets remained. We can actually see this inside of the book of Kings. 1 Kings 8 and 9. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb. Now, there's some confusion because some people think, is it Mount Horeb or is it Mount Sinai? The area, the region was called Horeb, the mountain was called Sinai. So again, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord had made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of the land of Egypt. Only the Levites were allowed to carry the Ark of the Covenant. So anytime that they had to move their camp, the Ark of the Covenant was the job of the Levites. They would carry it. They were the only ones allowed to touch it. As a matter of fact, when they would be in the most holy place, it was only Aaron at a certain time of the year that could be there. Otherwise, he was actually on the other side of the veil. And the priests were the only ones that were allowed inside of this area of the holy place, and the high priest in the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was. Deuteronomy 10 and 8. 10, 8-9. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord to serve him, and to pronounce blessings in his name, as they do to this day. Moses actually spent another 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain when he got the second set of the 10 Commandments. Remember, the first time he went on the mountain, the people thought that he had died, and that's when they had set up this idol. But when he went up the second time with 2 tablets of stone to once again have the finger of God right within these 2 tablets of stone, he spent another 40 days and 40 nights. Deuteronomy 10 and 10. I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, like the first time. And that time the Lord again listened to me and agreed not to destroy you. Something interesting comes up in this chapter, which is boiling a goat in its mother's milk. Exodus 34 and 26. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. You must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. This actually comes up multiple times in the Bible, 3 times in total. The second time it comes up is actually in Exodus 23 and 19, a few chapters back. It says, bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. You must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So it's very explicit. It comes up twice. It's actually said the exact same way. The other place you'll find it is in Deuteronomy. Exodus 23 and 34 led to kosher laws involving no meat eaten with dairy. So if you're familiar with some of the practices in Judaism, they have these rules called kosher. It's dietary restrictions, dietary laws. This kosher law specifically teaches Jews that they're not able to eat meat with dairy at the same time. I'm going to expound on that and show you what happened, and I'll tell you what the official ruling is based on the Bible. Meat and milk. This is Shabbat.org. Shabbat.org is a great resource to understand from a view of Judaism, at least coming from Israel, how they look at these different laws and rabbinical practices. One of the important aspects of observing kosher is keeping milk and meat properly separated. This prohibition is derived from the verse, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. This verse appears in the Torah 3 times, twice in Exodus, which we looked at, and once in Deuteronomy. The sages explain that the repetition of the verse teaches us that it is not only forbidden to cook meat and milk together, but it's also forbidden then to eat or derive benefit from the mixture. The Hebrew word giddy, kid goat, is understood to mean any young domestic animal, not only a kid goat. In fact, the Torah forbids the cooking, eating, and benefit of the meat of any kosher domesticated animal in any kosher milk. Can you have meat with cheese? The answer is absolutely. Why is that? We can see here in Judaism, or at least in what we read in Shabbat.org, it's strictly forbidden. So how is that we're able to have meat with cheese? What's going on here? Rabbinical laws. Since the Torah is somewhat vague in defining the parameters of this mitzvah, the rabbis felt it necessary to safeguard it by adding further restrictions. They felt that without these additional prohibitions, people would mistakenly think it was only forbidden to actually cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. So the rabbis expanded on what the Bible said. So they added further restrictions. And I'm going to show you in the New Testament where this is brought up by Christ himself. Where do these restrictions come from? Well, we know rabbinical texts usually have to do with the Talmud, but they also came from the Zohar. The Zohar states that one should not eat meat and milk in the same hour. For this reason, it is Shabbat custom to refrain from eating meat for a full hour after eating dairy. One who does need not eat or drink something else in between. Many other communities have a custom of waiting only half an hour before eating meat. They understand that the word Shah in Zohar to mean a period of time, not a literal hour. So these ideas did not come from the Bible. These ideas were expansions of words in the Bible. These were added. So in other words, when we look at the Zohar and we look at the rabbinical texts or the Talmud, this is where these ideas are coming from. The Bible specifically said, don't cook a goat, a young kid, in its mother's milk. That's all it said. We have to look at where the Zohar came from. The Zohar today has translated into something called the Kabbalah. There's a connection between the Zohar and the Kabbalah. As a matter of fact, I've made a video. It's on my channel, and it's the word rabbi, and it came from Iran. So rabbi and the Zohar both came from Iran, and of course, ancient Iran is Babylon. Rabbi came from the word Rab Meg, and Rab Meg is an Iranian word. Here's some Bible commentary to explain what exactly brought this on. This is Jameson Fawcett Brown Bible commentary. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in its mother's milk, a prohibition against imitating the superstitious rites of the idolaters in Egypt, who at the end of their harvest seethed a kid in its mother's milk and sprinkled the broth as a magical charm on their gardens and fields to render them more productive the following season. So you can see here what's going on is it's not just animal cruelty that the Lord was concerned with. I'm sure that was a concern, but more specifically, the people were practicing something from Egypt that had to do with some procreative kind of magic. They're basically trying to ensure that they have a good harvest by doing this strange ritual and then sprinkling this on the gardens and fields, thinking this would make the crops grow. Barnes notes on the Bible, thou shalt not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. This precept is repeated. See the marginal references. If we connect the first of the two preceding precepts with the Passover and the second with Pentecost, it seems reasonable to connect this with the Feast of Tabernacles. The only explanation which accords with this connection is one refers to a superstitious custom connected with the harvest in which a kid was seethed in its mother's milk to propitiate in some way the deities, and the milk was sprinkled on the trees, fields, and gardens as a charm to improve the crops of the coming year. So you can see here what's going on in this case is both examples are showing us that this was something that the people were doing who didn't know God to try to stimulate a good crop. If you wanted a good harvest, you follow the rules that God provided you in the Torah, but also you pray to the Lord for a successful crop. You don't have to do the sympathetic magic, especially this barbarous method of boiling a child in its mother's milk. This was superstition. This is when Christ actually speaks to some of these ideas. Matthew 16, 6-12. Watch out, Jesus told him. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So the Pharisees and Sadducees, these individuals would come into contact with Christ quite often. Let me tell you the difference, the major difference between a Pharisee and a Sadducee. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, but they did not believe that Christ was God. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, and they also did not believe that Christ was God. They discussed this among themselves and concluded, it is because we did not bring any bread. Aware of their conversation, Jesus said, you have little faith. Why are you debating amongst yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How do you not understand that I was not telling you about bread? But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So you can see the leaven here has nothing to do with bread. Then they understood that he was not telling them to beware of the leaven used in bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, this is where this word rabbi is showing up. Rabbi means master. Christ said, call no man your master. So this word rabbi, which came from Persia, this word itself, we can see is attached to false teachings. Christ is saying, remove the leaven, remove the extra teachings. These extra teachings aren't true. So enjoy your all beef hot dog with cheese, but no pork. The face of Moses was radiant. When Moses came down, remember, his face was glowing and the people were scared. They saw his face shining. Exodus 34:29. And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, remember the 2 tablets of the testimony, 10 commandments, he was unaware that his face had become radiant from speaking with the Lord. Aaron and all the Israelites looked at Moses, and behold, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to approach him. Overview of Exodus 34. The Lord told Moses to chisel 2 stone tablets like the originals and would write on them the same words that were on the first tablets which Moses had broken. Remember, this was over the golden calf. Moses was to come up to Mount Sinai to present himself before the Lord, and no one could go with him or be seen anywhere near the mountain, including cattle. Moses chiseled 2 new tablets and did as the Lord commanded, rising early in the morning to go up to Mount Sinai. So remember, Mount Sinai is in the region called Horeb. The Lord descended in a cloud and proclaimed his name, the Lord. The Lord told Moses he is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, maintaining love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity and sin, but he would not leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on their children and grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. There's curses, and we see that actually in Deuteronomy later. One thing I will point out here is in Exodus 34, we specifically see the Lord proclaim his name. Now remember, if Moses got the name Ea Asher Ea, I am that I am, from the burning bush in Exodus 3:14, here we can see the proclamation of the name of the Lord. So for people to have the name of the Lord in Genesis 4:26 during the days of Enosh, there was no official proclamation. The explanation, most likely, is that it came from the serpent. The serpent would have known the name of the Lord, and that's how the people would have had the name of the Lord earlier in the book of Genesis, before the people actually officially received it anywhere in the Bible from the Lord. Moses bowed and worshiped the Lord, saying that if he had found favor in the sight of the Lord, to forgive Israel and take them as his inheritance. Remember, we see in Deuteronomy later, it speaks about the nations were taken as an inheritance to the sons of God. And it's very clear to see this in Deuteronomy 32 and the Greek Septuagint. However, in the Masoretic text, it's not as clear. So when they built the tower in Babylon in Genesis 11, the sons of God, or the angels, as we see from the book of Job, the nations were divided amongst the angels. And then we see that Israel, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these were taken as an inheritance for the Lord. So the nations were controlled by the sons of God after Babylon, but Israel was something that the Lord took as his own inheritance. Those were his own people. The Lord said he is making a covenant, and before all the Israelites he would perform wonders never seen, never done in any nation of the world. The Lord said he would drive out the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites from the land they were entering, but the Israelites would not make any treaty with them, or it would become a snare to them. So if they made any agreements with these people, what would happen? Eventually they would start to marry. As they would marry, the men with the women would uphold the customs and traditions, because that's typically how it goes in the family, and the men would be pulled away from their God. This would become a snare to them. That's why they were not supposed to make any treaties with them, because they were not supposed to marry with them. We saw what happened with, for example, looking at Esau. Esau married Canaanites. He married specifically Horites. And then when his parents were upset, he married an Ishmaelite, thinking this would make it better. Moses was commanded to tear down the altars of the people in the land and smash their sacred stones and chop down their Asherah poles. So sacred stones, we can see that way back here before they even entered the promised land. These standing stones, the obelisks like we see in Egypt. Why would there be obelisks in the land of the Canaanites and also obelisks in the land of Egypt? Because if you understand that Canaan was the same as the brother Mizraim, they came from the same father. They had a father called Ham. Ham is where we had this cursed child called Canaan. Canaan went into a land he wasn't supposed to, which was the land of Shem. This is what became the promised land. So since Canaan was in the land that was Shem's, there was a separation between the Canaanites and their brother Mizraim, which is Egypt. So that's why you see a similar language and a similar religious practice being done in both Egypt and Canaan. The Israelites were told they must not worship any other god because the Lord is a jealous God. And we saw what happened with the golden calf. This was Moloch. Remember, eventually Moloch led to child sacrifice. But this jealousy isn't a bad jealousy. The Lord would be jealous in this fashion. If you have a bunch of sons of God, if you have a bunch of angels that are lesser than the Lord, he created them, and they're not good rulers, would you not be jealous if your children started to follow something that was lesser than you, and they weren't even good rulers to begin with? As we see in Psalms 82. The Israelites were told not to make covenants with the inhabitants of the land, or they would invite them as they made sacrifices to their gods, and the sons who would marry their daughters would end up doing the same. So, of course, when you make treaties, agreements, covenants, and then, of course, you intermarry in those families, you're going to start to pick up the religious practices of the people. And, of course, since men are not necessarily as firm with customs and traditions, what ends up happening is they follow their wives, and then they start doing the practices of worshiping these other gods. We saw with the Moabite women, when they tried to ensnare Israel with the curse of Balaam, Balaam was not able to curse Israel until what happened? Until the king brought the Moabite women, and the Moabite women came intermixed with the men, and then suddenly the men were worshiping other gods. The Israelites were not to make molten gods for themselves. They were told to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the month of Abib when they came out of Egypt. So Passover. The first offspring was to belong to the Lord, including the livestock. A firstborn donkey must be redeemed with a lamb, but if not redeemed, its neck must be broken. So, of course, the firstborn child was supposed to be given to the Lord, dedicated to the Lord. And then we see the firstborn animals. They were also to be dedicated to the Lord. But the donkey was different. If the donkey was a firstborn, it had to be redeemed with a lamb, or you'd have to break the donkey's neck. And if you're wondering the reason why, the donkey was actually a symbol for the Egyptian god Set, and Set is Satan. The Sabbath was to be kept on the seventh day, even during the seasons of plowing and harvesting. So even at the times of year when you have the most work to do, you still have to keep the Sabbath. There's no excuse for it. 3 times a year, the Israelite males were to appear before the Lord during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, which is actually just coming up this weekend, and the Feast of Tabernacles. It's also called the Feast of Ingathering or Sukkot. Sukkot is the Feast of Tabernacles. The tabernacle, of course, is a tent. So, of course, when they were moving through the wilderness, all the people were in tents. So we have a feast at the beginning of the year. That's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's the Passover. That's in March. And then we have the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, which is not too far after. And then at the end of the year, or at least the end of the harvest season, we have the Feast of Tabernacles or Ingathering. So 3 times a year, the males had to appear. The Israelites were told the Lord would drive out the nations, enlarge their borders, and no one was to take their land as long as the men appeared before the Lord 3 times a year. So you can see how important that these traditions were, these actual holy days. These holy days actually helped Israel preserve their borders. Once they stopped preserving these traditions, these holy days, that's when you start to see inhabitants from the surrounding nations come and drive them out of their land. The people were not to offer their Passover sacrifice with anything leavened, and none of the feast may remain until the morning. So remember, during the Passover, you have to cook the lamb until it's charred if you don't eat all of it. So if you can't finish all of the lamb, you take the bones and whatever meat is left, and you burn it in the fire until there is absolutely nothing left. And you cannot have the lamb with leaven. Remember, what does the leaven represent? False teachings. Additional added teachings, right? It makes bread rise. It makes it puffed up. In other words, if you take the Bible and you add leaven, you're puffing it up. You're adding all this extra stuff that's not in there. And that's what the Talmud and the Zohar are doing. So when you look at the Passover lamb is Christ. And then the leaven, these are the additional teachings. You don't need anything additional. Just follow Christ. They were to bring the best of their first fruits. And remember, when we studied Cain, the best of the first fruits were not brought by Cain. Cain did what? We find in the New Testament that Cain's offering, the reason why Cain's offering was in favor like Abel's, is because Abel brought the best of his flock. Cain just kind of brought whatever. You're supposed to bring the best that you have to God. That's your faith. That's what the transformation is here. When we look at the story of Cain and Abel, what we're actually talking about is you bring your best, you bring your faith. You don't kind of do your half best when you serve the Lord. You do the best that you can. And we see in the book of Revelation, there was a church called the Church of Laodicea, and they became very comfortable. And their comfort led to them just kind of doing their half best. A young goat could not be cooked in its mother's milk. We explain why that was. And of course, that led to these kosher laws. Moses was told to write down these words, as these words were the covenant he made with Moses and the Israelites. Moses was with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights, where the Lord wrote the 10 commandments on the 2 tablets of stone. When Moses came down from the mountain, his face was radiant, and the people were afraid to approach him. Moses called the leaders, and Aaron came to him and spoke with him. Moses then spoke to the Israelites and told them to do all the Lord had commanded him on Sinai. Moses placed a veil over his face, but when he spoke to the Lord, he removed the veil until he came out. Moses kept the veil over his face until he went to speak with the Lord. Remember, his face was radiant, it shone. And so he would cover his face. And then when he would see the Lord, he would lift this veil, and then he would speak to the Lord as his friend. Exodus 35. In Exodus 35, we see the Sabbath, offerings for the tabernacle, the skilled craftsmen, the people offer gifts, and Bezalel and Oliab. So, of course, you have to have someone who's skilled to build it. On the Sabbath, we find an interesting detail. No fire in your dwelling on the Sabbath. We actually see this in the first couple of verses of the chapter. It says, Exodus 35, 1 and 3. Then Moses assembled the whole congregation of Israel and said to them, These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. For 6 days work may be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a Sabbath of complete rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on that day must be put to death. And of course, when we look at the word rest going back in the book of Genesis, we can see that there's a connection to the word Sabbath. So this idea of rest goes all the way back to the creation of the world. 6 days, and on the seventh, he rested. And then you can see in verse 3, it says, Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. So no fires in the house. Pulpit commentary. The kindling of fire in the early times involved considerable labor. It was ordinarily effected by rubbing 2 sticks together or by twisting one round rapidly between the 2 palms in a depression upon a board. So you can see this is quite stressful. This is a lot of work. The idea this is a day of rest. So starting a fire wasn't something easy. Fire only came after a long time. Moreover, in the warm climate of Arabia and Palestine, artificial warmth was not needed. Fire could only have been kindled there for cooking purposes, which involved further unnecessary work that had already been forbidden. I'm going to speak to that in a second. The Karaite Jews still maintained the observance of this precept to the letter, even in cold climates, as in that of Crimea, and allow neither fire nor light in their houses on the Sabbath day. But the Jews generally viewed the precept as having only had a temporary force, and have lights and fires like other persons even in Palestine. Strict Jews, however, still cooked no food on the Sabbath day. So I'm going to speak to this. When I looked at this, I could only find one line in the Bible that spoke to this specifically. When it speaks about your dwelling, I am not sure if this is speaking of just inside the house or also outside of the house. What I can say, though, for sure, is that you are able to cook on this day. Exodus 12 and 16 says, On the first day you are to hold a sacred assembly, and on another on the seventh day. You must not do any work on those days except to prepare the meals. That is all you may do. So there's your clarification right there in regards to cooking. But in regards to an open flame, I would still step away from the open flame. I know there's arguments in revolving around electric stoves versus stoves with flame. I would say if you have a stove that is like propane, if you want to do it to the letter, maybe don't use it. But for the electric stoves and for the ovens, I probably wouldn't worry about it. Barbecues, I would probably have a different day. Like I said, there's not much instruction on this line, but there are some people that take this pretty extreme. The Lord appointed craftsmen and gave them their skills through his Spirit. So, of course, we saw that there were 2 that were appointed to have all this knowledge, and they didn't have the knowledge before. Exodus 31, 1 to 10. We're going to go back a bit. Then the Lord said to Moses, See, I have called by the name Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of craftsmanship, to design artistic works in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut gemstones for settings, and to carve wood, so that he may be a master of every craft. Moreover, I have selected Oliab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, as his assistant. I have also given skill to all the craftsmen, that they may fashion all that I have commanded you: the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, and the mercy seat upon it, and all the other furnishings of the tent, the table with its utensils, the pure gold lampstand with all its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, and the basin with its stand, as well as the woven garments, both the holy garments for Aaron the priest and the garments for his sons to serve as priests, in addition to the anointing oil and the fragrant incense for the holy place. Exodus 35 and 34. So this is what we are looking at here. And the Lord has given both him and Oliab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, the ability to teach others. And he has filled them with the skill to do all kinds of the work of engravers, designers, embroiderers in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, and as weavers, as the artistic designers of every kind of craft. So when you see in verse 35, it says he has filled them. You can see when you go back a couple chapters, he has filled them with what? The Holy Spirit. Once God fills his people with the Holy Spirit, he can teach them things that they're not necessarily able to do before, whether that's be wise or whether that's to have information about certain craftsmanship, like we can see here. So the Lord can give man any kind of wisdom. This is why you see humility, being humble, is so important. Because if the Lord has the capability to make anyone wise, don't sit there and be inflated. Don't be boastful, because the Lord could give wisdom to anyone he chose. He can take someone who is not very strong of speech, make them a better speaker. He can make someone that's not a teacher. He can make someone that's not a healer. And he can make someone that is not wise, full of wisdom. And it's done through his Spirit. Psalms 32:8. I will instruct and teach you the way you should go. I will give you counsel and watch over you. 1 Kings 3:12. Now we're looking at Solomon. He was the wisest man in the world. Here's why. Therefore, give your servant, this is Solomon, an understanding heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. So Solomon was asking for a heart to discern. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Now it pleased the Lord that Solomon had made this request. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, instead of requesting long life or wealth for yourself or death for your enemies, but you have asked for discernment to administer justice, behold, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has never been nor ever will be another like you. Solomon was the wisest man in the world, and this is where it all started. It was through asking the Lord, and the Lord answered his prayer and gave him exactly what he wanted, and he was wise. However, his wisdom didn't necessarily take him the direction he needed to go. 1 Kings 5:12. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom. See, he gave Solomon wisdom, and we know from the other chapters it was through the Holy Spirit, as he had promised him. There was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. Solomon was the wisest man in the world because the Lord gave him that wisdom. This is the same thing that's happening with the craftsman. We're going to move on to Exodus 36, though. In Exodus 36, we have the people bring more than enough materials. So everything that was needed to build the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the washing basins, the altar of incense, these were all more than enough provided for with the people. The people actually brought too much. 10 curtains of the tabernacle, 11 curtains of goat hair, the frames and the bases, the veil and the curtains for the entrance. So basically what we're doing is we're going through all the details of what it took to build this area so the priests were able to serve the Lord. In Exodus 26, Moses received the instructions from the Lord, and that's why we see a very strong synergy between these two chapters. Exodus 26, we receive the instructions. Exodus 36 describes the buildings of the items commanded by the Lord. Remember, Moses was talking to the Lord on the mountain, but in Exodus 36, now we're actually doing it. We're actually doing the building. So of course, the people, they were told, if your heart convicts you, right? This had to be something of free will. The Lord wanted them to bring these materials like gold and the fine linen and the scarlet yarn and the blue yarn and the purple yarn. This was supposed to be something of their own free will. And we saw that the people brought so much that it was too much. And then the builder said, okay, that's enough. We don't need any more. And that's when Moses gave the proclamation for the people to stop bringing their offerings. So a lot of people were convicted to serve the Lord and do what they could by giving up their possessions. What they ended up creating was this. And of course, this later became Solomon's temple. And when Solomon's temple was destroyed, they recreated this, but it was never at the same amount of glory. We can see here that there is an altar of incense. There's a table of showbread, the golden lampstand, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was behind a curtain. On one side, we had this veil. And on the other side, we had the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the most holy place. If you want to know the cardinal directions, which is important, the most holy place, or the holiest of holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, that was facing the west, which means the courtyard and the entrance to the courtyard was in the east. The table of showbread, that was towards the north. And then the golden lampstand was towards the south. There's your 4 cardinal points. And so if you take a look on the outside here, there was an area where there was sacrifice. So the animals were not sacrificed inside of this tent or the tent of meeting. The animals were sacrificed outside where this altar is and where the washing basin is. One time of a year, though, Aaron would go in on Yom Kippur, which is also known as the Day of Atonement. And he would go in and he would actually take blood and place it on the horns of the altar. That was one time a year. Here's another artist's depiction of what this looked like. And you can see that there were leather skins on the outside. There was the dyed ram skins. You can see this is the visual of what they had built. So if you look at the top left corner, you can see where it says badger skin. I'm going to show you another translation for what this could be. And keep in mind, they had to cross through the sea. So we'll look at what the badger skin could be, because the word actually is leather. And there are many different animals where you can get leather from. So we have the ram skin that's dyed red. We had the goat's hair. We had the linens. And then we can see that in the holiest of holies, we saw this pillar of fire that extended all the way to the skies. Remember, when they were coming out of Egypt on the Exodus, in the day, they followed a pillar of cloud. In the evening, they followed a pillar of fire. Exodus 36 and 19. Additionally, he made for the tent a covering of ram skins dyed red, and over that a covering of fine leather. What's this fine leather? Because we see different interpretations depending on who you look at that's translating this line. The word is tahash, so it's 8476. It says definition, perhaps porpoise, a kind of leather or skin. So it could have been something aquatic. It could have been like a whale skin. Basically, they had leather that went over the top, but that leather, it's kind of questionable as to what it was. So anyone's guess is good. But of course, if we're looking at something aquatic, remember, they had to cross the Red Sea. Exodus 36 overview. Moses assembled the whole congregation and told them of the Lord's command of the Sabbath. For 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day shall be their holy day, a Sabbath of complete rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on this day must be put to death, and no fires were to be lit in any of their dwellings during the Sabbath. Moses said, the Lord commanded that anyone's heart that is willing shall bring gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, fine linen, and goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and fine leather, acacia wood, olive oil for light, and spices for anointing oil, and the fragrant incense. Remember, when we looked at the fragrant incense, that could only be used specifically for the priests to serve the Lord. It wouldn't be used for the people. It couldn't be like a perfume. Onyx stones and gemstones to be mounted on the ephod and the breastplate. Remember when we studied the priest wore something that looked a lot like an apron? That's the ephod. And the breastplate went over top, and that's where these gemstones went in. Those gemstones show up in the book of Isaiah. The skilled craftsmen were to make everything the Lord commanded, such as the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and the veil to shield it. Remember, there was a veil between the Ark of the Covenant, dividing the holy place from the most holy place. The table that held the bread of the presence, the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the anointing oil, the curtain for the entrance to the tabernacle, the altar for the burnt offerings and the utensils, basin with its stands, the curtains of the courtyard and for the gate of the courtyard, the priestly garments for ministering in the holy place by Aaron and his sons. The Israelites left Moses, and everyone who the Spirit stirred within them brought an offering to the tent of meeting for its services and the holy garments for the priests. Moses and everyone who in the Spirit stirred within them brought an offering to the tent of meeting for its services and holy garments for the priest. All who had hearts that were willing brought their jewelry and presented them as a wave offering to the Lord, as well as yarn, fine linen, goat hair, acacia wood, gemstones, oil, and incense as a free will offering. The people had to bring this voluntarily. They weren't forced to bring this. The Lord filled Bezalel from the tribe of Judah with the Spirit of God to have knowledge in all kinds of craftsmanship and be a master of every craft. Bezalel and Oliab from the tribe of Dan were both given the ability to teach others in engraving. How were they given the ability? Through the Holy Spirit. So they were teaching others to engrave, embroider, weave, and design every kind of craft. They had to work as a team to build out this equipment. It wasn't just done by two of them. Bonus content. Moses had horns. We've covered a chapter actually where there's a really strong point of contention, and you see it in artwork all throughout Europe. Moses was depicted many times in art as having horns. Why exactly did Moses have horns? We actually read about this, but of course, depending on the translation, you might not see it. One of the earliest depictions of Moses having horns was by famous sculptor Michelangelo. Michelangelo's Moses, the Victoria and Albert Museum. Commissioned in 1505 by Pope Julius II for his tomb, it depicts the biblical figure Moses with horns on his head, based on a description in the chapter 34 of Exodus in the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible used at that time. The only English translation I could even find with the word horns was the Douay-Rheims translation, which has connections to the Catholic Vulgate. If you want to see more information on that, please have a look at my video titled The Structure of the Books of the Bible. Since the Douay-Rheims version of the English translation pulls from the Latin Vulgate, I decided to take a look at Exodus 34 and 30 and the Catholic Vulgate on vulgate.org. In verse 30, we can see that Moses was horned, and in the Latin, horned is written as cornatem. I took a look at the Latin dictionary as confirmation, and as you can see, the word cornatus, cornada, and the word in question, cornatum, means horn-like or horn-shaped. However, the Old Testament, and more specifically the books of the Torah, were not written originally in Latin. These books were written in Hebrew. So the question becomes, what does Exodus 34 say in Hebrew? If we look at the Hebrew written word associated to each English word, we can see the word Quran appearing where it says Sean, which is the word being translated as horns in the Latin Vulgate as cornatum. The meaning of the Hebrew word Quran means to send out rays, and the word Sean seems to be a much better fit to depict that. In some translations, we see the word radiant as if his face was glowing. When we look at the word Quran, we can see it also has a root word which originates from the word Karen. The word Karen, which Quran came from, means a horn. The likely reason why you're seeing an overlap between Karen and Quran is because when something is shining, rays of light extend in several directions, and those streaks of light could be symbolically described like horns. That appears to make logical sense because in many of these images, it looks like Moses has horns of light extending from his head, but only two, as if they were literal horns. Now that we have figured out where the horns are coming from, being that they were used to depict rays of light coming from the face of Moses, from a mistranslation of the word Quran, being taken too literally, likely from its root word Karen, and then being written in Latin as cornatum, which literally means horns. But still we need to know, why was the face of Moses shining after he came down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments? When Moses went up to Mount Sinai, some books it's written as Mount Horeb, to speak with God, he was coming into contact with an immense light. 1 John 1:5 is a verse that can shed some light on that. A little biblical humor for those who noticed. 1 John 1:5 reads, "This is the message which we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him no darkness at all." This is a very different description from what Michelangelo depicted in his work of an older man with a beard, which many people who haven't read the Bible imagine in their heads when they envision God. These paintings by Michelangelo, and many others like it, are considered iconoclasm, which I'll save for another video, but iconoclasm has to do with paintings, sculptures, etc. that depicted God, heavenly beings, or what resides below the earth, as it was commanded in the Bible not to illustrate these things, which has created a lot of controversy between Constantinople and Rome. So now that we know that God is light, we can start to understand why the face of Moses would radiate with light when he came down from the mountain. We also know that this happened later in the Bible in the New Testament, when Christ had been transfigured. We read about this in Matthew 17:2, which reads, "After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light." Here in Matthew, we can see that Christ was transfigured on the mountain. His face also shone like the sun. The Greek's word for transfigured is metamorpho, which is where we get the English word metamorphosis. And lastly, in Revelation 1:16, we read, "He held in his right hand 7 stars, and a sharp double-edged sword came from his mouth. His face was like the sun shining at its brightest." So again, we can see that God is light, as his face was like the sun shining at its brightest. Now we can absolutely confirm Moses did not have literal horns, but his face was shining like the sun, and rays of light were radiating from it, since he had just encountered God, who is light, as opposed to this imagery that artists like Michelangelo had placed in our minds through their artwork, which is iconoclasm. The altar of Pergamon had many different deities that were worshipped, but the chief deity was the Greek Zeus, who is the Roman Jupiter. Often, this was called the altar of Zeus. At Pergamon, we can see that both Zeus and Athena were associated to the altar in Pergamum. This is important because now we can see some overlaps as to why Alexander was depicted with horns, being that Zeus, was also known as Jupiter, was depicted with horns in the form of Jupiter Amun, associated to the ram horn of Ares. Just like Michelangelo, who was involved in the mystery religion of the ancient world, we can see the horns of Amun were a symbol in reference to a part of the brain. This is completely aligned with the Hermetic teaching of as is above, so is below, or the microcosm and the macrocosm, where the sky mirrored the earth and the internal human anatomy. In this image of Amun-Ra, we can see the ram above him, where Amun is the representation of the brainstem. Above Amun-Ra, which symbolized the brainstem, we can see the hippocampus of the brain, or Amun's horns. This would equate the constellation Aries to the ram with the hippocampus of the brain and the horns of Amun, as Amun was often seen with the ram or as the ram. Michelangelo, who was knowledgeable of the brain from his various dissections, and his knowledge of the mysteries were being placed into his sculptures of Moses based on the mistranslation of the Latin Vulgate, Moses having horns. The mystery religion, while intriguing, does not overlap with the Bible, as the teachings are not compatible with one another. The mystery religion made a relationship between the heavens, the earth, and the anatomy, which were associated to deities both inside and outside the body. The ancient Israelites, on the other hand, did not have their knowledge rooted in the zodiac or worship of the stars, and the Gentile nations which practiced these mysteries were referred to as the Akum, or star worshippers. The Jews wrote in Deuteronomy 17:3 and Deuteronomy 4:19 not to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars, as they were not placed there for worship. The sun, moon, and stars were simply part of the creation, not deities to venerate, or as the Egyptians taught, spirits that were behind these objects would have been a form of idol worship, called astrolatry, which today is commonly called astrotheology. While there are many still to this day that attempt to overlap the two ideologies, they are doing so based on false associations and symbolism not taken into context with the other verses in the Bible, condemning these very connections. Did Moses have horns in the Bible? No, he had rays that shone from his face after seeing a God of light on Mount Sinai. What happened was a blending of the mystery religion formerly practiced in Rome with a mistranslation in the Old Testament, which was only amplified by artwork later in time. Exodus 34 and 30. Aaron and all the Israelites looked at Moses, and behold, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to approach him. This word radiant is where they gain this word horns. So like you saw in the video there, Quran, to send out rays. And of course, Quran comes from this word Karen, and Karen is the word horn. Quran is used only 4 times in the Bible. 3 of those times are actually all in Exodus 34, and they're all referring to the face of Moses. However, it shows up 1 time in the book of Psalms. Psalm 69:31. This will please the Lord more than an ox or a bull with horns, Quran, and hooves. This is the only place in the entire Bible where the word Quran is translated as horns, and you can tell by the context it's appropriate. However, when they applied it to Exodus 34 in any of those areas, it doesn't make any sense. Moses did not have horns. What they're doing is they're blending the mystery religion of Babylon. Here we can see on the left, Zeus Amun. Zeus is a blending of a Greek god with Amun, an Egyptian god. And this is how we get this Amun-Ra Zeus, which has horns on his head, which is the hippocampus of the brain. And then we can see Alexander the Great. Remember, Alexander the Great, with the Greek mysteries, he also built a place called Heliopolis. And there was a Heliopolis that was in Egypt. It's the place that's missing from the Bible, the 3rd city that the Jews had built, the Hebrews had built, except it's not accounted for in the Masoretic text. It only shows up in the Greek Septuagint. But interestingly enough, we can see that in both the Greek mysteries, which is where Zeus comes from, and in the Egyptian mysteries, where Amun-Ra comes from, horns shows up with both. So clearly, Alexander the Great was copying the Egyptian religion. If we take a look at Zeus and we take a look at the statues of Moses, you can tell that what they were depicting wasn't Moses, they were actually depicting Zeus. They had made Zeus into Moses. And of course, when we take a look at these other pictures of Moses, it wasn't light they were depicting, they were actually depicting literal horns, because it was the horns of the brain. And if you take a look, you can see Christ when he was transfigured in the book of Matthew. This is the appropriate idea. We can see that God is light. And so, of course, when Christ was seen on top of this mountain, the heavens and Father, what you're seeing here is you're seeing he started to radiate. He started to shine like the sun. That was no different than what happened with Moses. I also thought I'd point out this word Karen. The word Karen, like the funny meme we see all the time. Karen is actually connected to the word Karan, which is horn. If you take a look at behindthename.com, you'll find that the Hebrew transliteration Karen from the archaic Aramaic root, which means horn, both an object, corner of an altar, animal, god, goddess, and a horn, flask, container, carved container, or vessel ivory, conceptually a cornucopia. And of course, Zeus held a cornucopia. Figuratively, it symbolizes power, or an object as a vessel of power. Also ray beams, particularly light or power. So Alexander the Great, if he had horns on his head, that could signify that he was a deity. It could also signify his power. It could be both. And it also connects him to the god Zeus. Apart from the biblical reference, Karen in Hebrew has a dual meaning. Both horn, same as in English, both the antler of a horned creature and material objects made of as in horn and ivory, and ray, again, with corresponding English meanings. Karen or light ray, Karen Shemesh, sun ray or sunshine, Karen laser, a laser ray, a beam. Koran, by the way, is radiant, and a reason why many depictions of Moses in medieval paintings have him antlered, with light sometimes shining in two twin rays from his head. When the text, he merely shone brightly. Since the Hebrew name is quite common, and none who name their daughters do so with the shortened biblical name description referring to makeup, thought it's important to mention. So this is behind the name. When you think of the name Karen, and people are calling people these days as someone who's being like a negative Nancy or being bossy, a Karen, well, Karen comes to the word horn. It's kind of funny because the horn was a symbol of power. So the word Karen actually has this meaning of power behind it. I thought that was funny to connect.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.